I was 18 when I heard I was pregnant, and it was the first time I felt lost. At first, it seemed like a gift, a new chance, a promise of life, but that feeling soon faded. I was with him, a boyfriend who everyone said was perfect for me, but he wasn't like that at all. During the pregnancy, I saw his true face. He, who used to make me feel special, could now barely look at me without making cruel comments. I was going through the worst phase in my life, and he didn't care. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what to do. With every punch, every rude word, the pain in my body and soul grew. But the worst of all was seeing him go off to parties, drink until he fell over, and leave me here alone, dealing with everything. He said that the child wasn't his, that I was just taking advantage of the situation. And the more he denied me, the deeper I sank into a deep hole with no light, no way out. The hunger was constant, but he never cared. If I tried to complain, he would silence me with a sarcastic laugh or even with cruel words, calling me useless, telling me that I was weak, incapable of doing anything on my own. Every day, I looked in the mirror and saw a different woman, someone who no longer recognized herself. But there was a voice, a silent voice, that told me that I could still get out of this. I just needed to find strength, some strength within myself that would make me fight for my dignity, for my child, for a future where I would be more than the person he made me believe I was. It was one night when he came back once again with that smell of alcohol permeating his body, that something inside me broke completely. I was sitting on the couch with my stomach swollen, feeling the weight of pregnancy dragging me down when he walked through the door. Without even looking at me, he went straight to the bar and opened a bottle of vodka. I looked at him, and it was like I was seeing a stranger. Everything he did, everything he said only made me feel more insignificant. He glanced at me, laughed, and asked if I was ready to be the mother of a child that is not his. I swallowed the anger, the fear, the pain, and remained there, without reacting. But that night, something changed inside me. The anger began to grow in a way I had never felt before. That anger made me wake up. The next morning, after another night of verbal and physical abuse, I knew I couldn't go on like this any longer. I didn't know how, but I had to get out of that situation. I no longer wanted to be the woman who hid, who silently accepted every humiliation. I didn't want to be the woman who no one respected. Not him, not myself. What hurt me the most was seeing that, while he laughed at me, I felt helpless, weak, as if I had no value at all. I looked at my belly and thought about my son, who hadn't even been born yet, but was already teaching me more than any words he could have said. I knew that the only thing I could still do for myself and my son was to fight. And at that moment, I decided that was exactly what I would do. That day, I finally decided to seek help. It wasn't easy. Shame was eating away at me. I knew that if anyone knew what was happening, they might judge me for having stayed in that situation for so long. But I couldn't care about that anymore. The pain of living that nightmare gave me courage. I called a friend, someone I knew still cared about me. She listened to me, didn't judge me, and with that, I felt instant relief. She took me to a shelter for women who are victims of domestic violence. I was still scared. My body was still shaking from what I had experienced, but something inside me was starting to change. I was doing something for myself and for my son. The change didn't happen overnight. The first few days at the shelter were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt lost, completely out of place, surrounded by women who had been through pain I couldn't even imagine. But at the same time, there was a sense of protection that I had never experienced before. The guidance, the care, the words of support. Everything seemed so far removed from the violence and humiliation I had experienced. Little by little, I began to think about what I would do next. I no longer wanted to be the dependent woman who accepted everything without question. I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to be someone my son could look up to and be proud of, someone he could see as strong despite everything. Time passed, and I began to get used to the new rhythm of life. I learned to deal with homesickness and insecurities about the future, but I also learned to trust myself. I went to the psychologist, attended meetings at the shelter, and talked to other women who were going through the same thing. Each one had their own story, but they all had a common purpose: to try to start over. I saw myself in so many of them, and in the midst of all this, I began to imagine life with my son. I didn't know how or when, but I knew it could be different. I no longer wanted to depend on anyone to be happy or have control over my life. I wanted to do whatever it took to be a good mother, but also an independent woman, unafraid to be who I really am. As time passed and my belly grew, my anguish also intensified. I knew the baby was coming and that things would not be easy, but I was determined to do whatever it took. What hurt me the most was the feeling that he would never see my son. He who humiliated me, who mistreated me, who refused to be part of our lives, and that gave me even more strength. I didn't want him to have the power to destroy us. When the pain started, I knew I was ready to face the birth alone because I had learned to live without his presence. And deep down, I knew that I would be more than capable of doing everything for myself and my son, even without anyone by my side. When the moment of delivery arrived, everything seemed surreal. I was there alone in the hospital, but at the same time, I felt a strength inside me that I never imagined I had. The contractions were strong and fast, but each pain seemed to bring me closer to what I always wanted, to be the mother my son deserved. Someone capable of protecting him and caring for him without fear. When I heard my baby cry for the first time, everything became clear. The fear I felt disappeared. The pain turned into relief, and in that moment, I knew that my life would never be the same again. My son was there in my arms, and from that moment on, it was him and me against the world. The first few days with my son were challenging, but at the same time, wonderful. Every look, every smile, every sigh from my baby reminded me of everything I had overcome. I was no longer alone. He gave me a reason to fight every day. I remember waking up to his cries during the first few nights, and despite my exhaustion, I felt stronger every minute. He needed me and I needed him. What hurt me, however, was knowing that he would never know his father, who was out there lost in parties and drinking. I didn't know if he even knew about his son's birth. I didn't know if he cared. What really mattered now was that I had a chance to create something new, something real, something full of love. Over time, I began to organize myself. The nights were still long and difficult, but my love for my son gave me the strength to carry on. I knew that the difficulties would not stop. It was a new beginning, but also a sea of uncertainty. I didn't have a steady job. I didn't have a support network other than a few friends from the shelter. But each step I took seemed to bring me closer to a life worth living. I started looking for a job, anything that would give me a little more security. Money was tight, and the days without sleep were starting to take their toll on me, but I couldn't stop. My son's smile, the way he held my hand, reminded me of everything I still had. The opportunity to rebuild my life, to be the woman he needed me to be. The months went by, and I became stronger every day. I learned to deal with loneliness and adversity, but one thing still bothered me deeply. Him. He was the one who left me here, with a son in my arms and an emptiness in my heart. What hurt me the most was not the lack of money, but the certainty that he never wanted to know about the son I was raising. And in a way, that still hurt me. But I could no longer let what he thought or felt interfere in my life. I was raising my son in the most loving and strong way possible, and that, I knew, was more than he would ever be able to offer. Over time, things started to fall into place. I got a job as an assistant in a clothing store, which wasn't what I dreamed of, but it was what I could do at the time. I felt exhausted at the end of each day, but there was a growing peace within me. The money was small, but it was mine. I didn't have to rely on anyone to take care of my son. He was growing up strong and healthy, and each day I felt more fulfilled. He smiled at me, called me mommy, and gave me one more reason to keep going. Life wasn't perfect, but I was learning to live with what I had, and that gave me a strength I never knew I had inside me. One day, while I was at work, I got a text from a friend. She told me that my son's father, the one who had been abusing me, was asking about the baby. Something inside me stirred. The anger, the pain, everything I had buried for months came flooding back. But at the same time, there was a sense of freedom. He had never wanted anything to do with me, never wanted anything to do with his son. And now, after all this time, he was coming back, trying to intrude. I knew that wouldn't change anything. I was his mother. I was raising my son. And most of all, I was protecting him from a man who never deserved to be in our lives. I ignored the message. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was nothing more than a desperate attempt by someone who never had the courage to be there when it really mattered. I didn't want my son to know about this. I wanted him to grow up without the pain of rejection, without the burden of abandonment. And if his father ever wanted to show up, it would be at the right time, when my son was able to understand what it meant to have someone like him in his life. I was raising my son with love and effort, and that was all he needed. When my son smiled at me, when he called me Mommy with such love and trust, it gave me a sense of fulfillment I never imagined possible. Little by little, I got used to the idea that I was alone, but that didn't mean my life was empty. Each day, each small step I took toward creating a future for the two of us made me feel stronger. Work was still hard. My salary barely covered the bills, but the happiness of seeing my son grow up in an environment free from violence, where he was safe and loved, was worth much more than any luxury or material comfort. I started making plans for the future, for when he was older and I could seek more stability. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined to become the woman I had always dreamed of being. Someone my son would look up to and be proud of. The months passed quickly, and my son was starting to take his first steps. I felt so proud of him and at the same time, proud of myself. Every laugh he made, every new word he said, was a reminder that despite everything we had been through, we were doing okay. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I already had enough, and that was all that mattered. With every step he took, I knew that I, too, was moving away from a painful past. I was creating his future, the one I had always imagined it would be. He deserved to grow up in a loving home, with a mother who would be his greatest source of support and strength. I was becoming more and more the woman he needed, the one who would never let him go through the same things I had. One day, after a long day at work, when I got home and was playing with my son on the couch, something inside me clicked. I didn't know how, but I knew I wanted more for him and for myself. I wanted him to have the best education, to have access to everything I didn't have. I wanted more stability, more security. When he grew up, I wanted him to know that his mother did everything she could to give him the best life possible, that she never gave up on him. I went to the local library and started looking for courses that would allow me to grow in my career, something that would give me more prospects, not only for myself, but for him as well. The idea of a safer and better future gave me immense motivation, and I knew that if I continued on this journey of overcoming, there would be no limit to what I could achieve. Little by little, I started to make new friends, people who supported me, who understood the difficulties I faced and respected my struggle. I never thought I would be able to trust anyone again, but things were changing. I realized that life could be easier when you surround yourself with people who truly want to see the best for you. I started to open up more, to share with these new friends the difficulties of being a single mother, but also the joys. Seeing my son grow up by my side with such a pure smile and full of confidence made me believe that all the effort was worth it. He was no longer the fragile baby that I protected out of fear. He was becoming a happy and energetic child with the promise of a better future. And then the unexpected happened. During one of my most tiring days, as I was coming home from work with my son in my arms, I found a letter at home. It was from the lawyer. Apparently, my son's father, who had been distant until then, was trying to reconnect. He wanted to see his son. I looked at the letter, my heart pounding in my chest, and thought, what do I do now? The anger and pain came back, and I felt a mixture of fear and indignation. But at the same time, I knew that this was an important decision. I could no longer allow the past to control me. I needed to think about my son, about what he deserved. I needed to decide what was best for him, and to do that, I would have to be strong and let go of the past. I took a deep breath as I opened the letter. I didn't want to give in to anger or fear anymore, but they were there, trying to suffocate me. I read the words calmly, as if the simple act of reading them could give me clarity. He wanted to see my son, he wanted to be a part of his life. But after everything that had happened, the last thing I wanted was to let him get close. I felt torn. What did my son really need? Did he need a father? Or did he already have everything he needed in me? I knew the decision was mine. I wouldn't allow someone who had treated me as less than nothing to be a part of our lives again, but the doubts still consumed me. What would be best for him? I had to take this step, but I didn't know if I was ready to face the weight of such a difficult choice. The night passed and I couldn't sleep. My son was in his crib, peaceful, unaware of the storm that was raging inside me. I knew that whatever I decided now would impact not only his life, but mine as well. I spent the whole night thinking about what he deserved, and in the end, one thing became clear. My son deserved love, yes, but he also deserved peace. He deserved to grow up in an environment where respect was the foundation, where he didn't have to carry the weight of a past that still enveloped him. And most importantly, he deserved to have a mother who truly loved him and who was his source of strength. I decided that he didn't need a father who, despite his biology, was never present. He needed me, only me. When I finally made the decision, something inside me calmed down. It was like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't have to look back anymore. The pain, the anger, the doubt, all of that was now behind me, because I knew that what I was doing was what was best for my son. I didn't need his father to make sure he was loved, respected, or cared for. I could do it. I always could. And my son would grow up in an environment where he wouldn't have to carry the guilt of a father who chose not to be there. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, I was at peace with my choice, and that gave me a peace I had never experienced before. The following days were easier. I knew that despite the daily challenges, my decision had been made with a heart full of love and courage. My son was growing up. He was already starting to say his first words and take his first steps, and I knew I was doing everything right. Even on the hard days, when exhaustion took over, I looked at him and saw all the reason I needed to keep going. The work, the sleepless nights, the small daily difficulties, everything seemed small when compared to the immense love I felt for him. And the best of all was knowing that he had a mother who loved him deeply, who was willing to give everything to see him grow up happy and safe. Time passed, and as my son grew, I felt myself growing with him. Each step, each change in him reflected a change in me. I was learning to be more patient, stronger, more confident. I still didn't have everything I wanted: the financial stability, the solid career, the luxuries I dreamed of, but I had something that was far more valuable. The peace of mind that came with knowing that I was doing what was best for him and for myself. When he started talking, he would grab my attention with his little gestures and words. "Mommy," he would say, and that gave me an immeasurable sense of purpose. He was growing up in a loving home, and that was all that mattered. Sometimes I still found myself wondering what his life would be like if his father were around. But I soon realized that it didn't matter anymore. I was raising my son with a strength I never knew I had. He didn't miss something he never had, because everything he needed was right here. I watched him play, smile, and it felt like every day was a new achievement, a step further away from that dark past. I was learning more and more each day that being a single mother wasn't a burden, but a force that shaped me in ways I never imagined. We were growing together, and that made it all worth it. As my son approached 3 years old, I began to realize how he saw me, and that gave me strength. He didn't remember anything that had happened before, but he knew what love meant. He hugged me without fear, looked at me with pure confidence, and that made me want to be the best version of myself. He was my mirror, my reflection that despite everything I had been through, I had found a way to be happy and strong again. Sometimes when he would let go and run around with that smile that only he has, I would catch myself thinking about how everything I did, every decision, every effort was for him. I never regretted anything because I knew I was building something real. I was still working at the store and life was never easy, but I learned to be proud of what I had built. My son and I together were our own family with our own rules, with no one to judge or put us down. Every day with him was a victory, every moment an achievement. I no longer cared about what I had left behind. What mattered was the present and the future I was building. Things weren't perfect, but I learned to value what really mattered. Our peace, our love, our bond, that was everything. And I knew that no matter what happened, I would never again allow anything or anyone to take us away from what we were building. As the years went by, life became more predictable, but in a good way. I knew what to expect each day, and that gave me a sense of security that I never imagined I would have. Work was still a struggle, but I was grateful to have a job and to be able to support my son on my own. He continued to grow up healthy and happy, and I was proud of him as he learned new things. At 5 years old, he was already going to school, and watching how he interacted with the other children warmed my heart. He had an infectious smile, always welcoming everyone with genuine joy. He was the reason I never stopped fighting, and now, watching him grow up strong and independent, I knew that everything I had done had been worth it. And finally, I began to realize that what I had always sought, a life of dignity without fear and without pain, was within my reach. It wasn't a life full of riches or luxury, but it was a life of truth. I felt content with what I had, and my son, with his innocence and joy, showed me every day that what matters is what is built with love and perseverance. I looked at him one afternoon, playing in the garden, and I felt a deep peace. He was my reward, the reason for everything. I no longer needed validation from anyone. He looked at me with such pride and confidence that I knew I was fulfilling my mission. He was proof that even in the darkest moments, there was light, and now we were each other's light.